There is a particular feeling that arrives when you look at a photograph and your mind quietly refuses it. Not disbelief exactly, something softer. A small hesitation, a flicker of suspicion, a thought that forms before you can stop it. That isn't real. Someone made that. Someone painted the sky in, or pulled the colors too far, or built the whole thing inside a machine. We have grown used to being deceived by images. It is the ordinary weather of our century. And so when the world produces something genuinely strange, our first instinct is no longer wonder, it is doubt. This film is about the places that survive that doubt, places you can walk to, places with weather and dust and insects and the smell of hot stone, places where you can put your hand against a rock and feel the heat of the actual sun on it. And still, when you photograph it and show someone at home, they will squint and say, "That's been edited." There are stones in a California desert that move across the ground on their own, leaving long trails behind them with nobody there to push them. There is an island where a third of the plants grow nowhere else on Earth, where the trees stand like opened umbrellas against a bare sky. There is a lake in the North Atlantic that appears to float hundreds of meters above the sea. There is a stretch of Ethiopian ground that glows acid yellow and green, hot enough to kill, and beautiful in a way that feels like a mistake. None of it is invented. All of it has an address. What follows is a slow tour through 14 of these locations, and the honest answer is that not all of them can be explained. Some can. The geology is patient and it eventually gives up its secrets. But others are still open questions. Carved stones older than agriculture, statues that walked, walls fitted so precisely we cannot fully account for them. We will move gently between the two. This is not an argument. It is closer to a long look. The tone here is quiet on purpose, because these places reward quiet. They are not spectacular in the loud sense. Most of them are silent. Most of them are empty. Most of them have been doing exactly what they are doing now for a very long time, entirely without an audience, and they will continue after we go. What they offer is not excitement. It is a kind of vertigo, the sense that the world you have been living in casually, the world of parking lots and weather forecasts, contains rooms you have never entered, rooms that look impossible, rooms that are nonetheless simply there. Begin with a single detail: a rock, roughly the size of a loaf of bread, sitting on flat, cracked mud. Behind it, running out across the lake bed for 100 meters or more, is a groove, a track. The rock has clearly been dragged, but there are no tire marks, no footprints, no animal tracks, nothing but the trail and the stone at the end of it, sitting very still in the sunlight as though it has just this moment stopped moving. This is Racetrack Playa in the far northern reaches of Death Valley National Park. It is a dry lake bed about 4 kilometers long, flat to a degree that is difficult to convey. Over that entire distance, the elevation changes by only a few centimeters. It is one of the flattest natural surfaces on the continent. The mud dries into a mosaic of hexagonal cracks that stretches to the horizon in every direction, and the whole place has the appearance of something drafted rather than grown. Getting there requires 40 kilometers of unpaved road that eats tires for entertainment. Most people who set out do not arrive. Those who do find hundreds of stones scattered across the surface, and behind many of them, those long, unmistakable trails. Some are dead straight, some curve gently, some make sharp turns, or double back on themselves, or run parallel to a neighboring track for a while before veering off alone. Occasionally, two stones travel side by side in perfect formation, as if in conversation. The stones themselves range from pebbles to slabs, weighing hundreds of kilograms. For most of the 20th century, nobody knew how they moved. The phenomenon was documented as early as the 1900s and studied seriously from the 1940s onward, and it produced exactly the kind of speculation you'd expect. Magnetic fields, hurricane-force winds, pranksters with ropes, something less polite. Researchers marked stones, mapped their positions, returned years later to find them somewhere else entirely. One geologist tracked a stone that had moved more than 250 meters over several years. Nobody in all that time had ever seen one move. The answer arrived in 2014, and it turned out to be delicate rather than dramatic. In rare winters, a shallow layer of water collects on the playa, just a few centimeters deep. On cold nights that water freezes into a thin window pane of ice, only millimeters thick. In the morning sun, the ice begins to break apart into large floating panels. And then a light wind, genuinely light, sometimes only 3 or 4 meters per second, pushes those ice panels across the water. Where a panel meets a stone, it shoves. The stone, sitting on soft, saturated mud, slides. Slowly, a few centimeters a second at most. Silently, or nearly so, with a faint tinkling of shifting ice. The trail it leaves is pressed into the mud, and when the water evaporates and the surface bakes hard again, the trail is preserved for years. It is worth sitting with the strangeness of that mechanism. Every element has to align, enough rain to flood, but not too much. Cold enough to freeze, but not thick enough to lock. Sun to break the ice, and wind of precisely the right gentleness. Get anyone wrong and nothing happens. This may occur once in a decade. The stones spend years perfectly motionless, and then, over the course of a few winter mornings that almost nobody witnesses, they take a walk. The researchers who finally captured it on camera described watching something they had been told essentially was unwatchable. The explanation doesn't diminish the place. If anything, it makes it stranger. The discovery that the impossible thing was real, was happening, and required conditions so specific that the world had to conspire to produce it. Stand out there on a still afternoon, and the lake bed is completely silent. The mountains around it are dry and brown. Nothing moves, and the ground is covered in evidence that when nobody is looking, everything did. A tree that appears to have been drawn by someone who was told what a tree is, but had never seen one. The trunk is thick and pale, rising a few meters before splitting, and splitting again and again, each branch dividing at almost the same angle, until the whole crown flattens out into a dense green disc held up like an opened umbrella. Beneath it, the ground is bare rock. Around it, more of them, standing across a limestone plateau in the haze, all the same shape, all the same height, like a gathering that has been waiting a long time. This is the dragon's blood tree, and this is Socotra. Socotra is an archipelago in the Arabian Sea, about 350 kilometers off the coast of Somalia, and roughly 400 from mainland Yemen, to which it belongs. It is not a volcanic island born from the sea floor. It is a fragment of continent, a piece of ancient Gondwana that separated from Africa and Arabia somewhere in the region of 20 million years ago and has been drifting in isolation ever since. That isolation is the entire story. When a landmass is cut off for long enough, evolution stops comparing notes with the mainland. Species drift, they adapt to local conditions with no outside competition and no correction. Given 20 million years, they become things that exist nowhere else. On Socotra, roughly a third of the plant species are endemic, found on this island group and on no other ground on Earth. Around 300 plant species out of about 825. Comparable figures apply to its reptiles and its land snails. Biologists reach for Galapagos as a comparison and then usually admit that Socotra is stranger. The dragon's blood tree is the emblem, and its architecture is not decorative. In an arid climate with little rainfall, that dense flat canopy captures moisture from mist and low cloud, condensing it and channeling it down the trunk to the roots. The shape also shades its own root zone from the sun and shelters seedlings beneath it. It is a machine for surviving thirst, refined over a very long time. Cut the bark, and it bleeds a deep red resin, the dragon's blood of the name, which has been harvested for millennia as a dye, a medicine, a varnish for violins, and, in the ancient world, as a substance traded across the Mediterranean under the assumption that it came from actual dragons. But the tree is only the most photographed inhabitant. There is the desert rose, or bottle tree, which swells into a bulbous grey trunk like an inflated elephant's foot and produces improbable pink flowers directly from it. There is the cucumber tree, the only tree in the cucumber family, thick-trunked and knobbled and looking rather embarrassed about itself. There are frankincense and myrrh species found nowhere else. The landscape they occupy is equally unlikely. White dunes piled hundreds of meters up against limestone cliffs, deep gorges with freshwater pools, and the Hagia Mountains rising to 1,500 meters, granite peaks that catch cloud and keep the whole system alive. Around 12,000 years ago, much of Socotra was thought to be far greener than it is now. The forests have retreated with drying climate and grazing pressure, and the dragon's blood trees are in slow decline. Many surviving stands are old, and the seedlings that should be replacing them are eaten by goats or fail in the changing weather. Models suggest a substantial loss of suitable habitat within this century. There is also the difficulty of Yemen, a country enduring war, which makes conservation and access complicated in ways that footnotes cannot cover. Socotra is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and around 60,000 people live there, many speaking Socotri, an unwritten Semitic language of considerable age. What lingers is the sense of a parallel result. Given the same starting materials and the same physics, isolated for long enough, life produced something that looks like a rehearsal for a different planet. It is not alien. It is entirely of this Earth. It simply grew up in another room. A limestone pillar, 5 meters tall, weighing perhaps 10 tons. Carved in relief along its face, a fox mid-leap, tail extended. Below it a boar. Around the side a line of cranes. The pillar is shaped like a capital T, and when you look at it properly, you understand that the T is a body. There are arms carved down the sides, hands meeting across the front, a belt, the suggestion of a loincloth. It is a figure. It is standing in a circle with other figures like it, all facing inward. And it was buried, deliberately, roughly 11,500 years ago. Göbekli Tepe sits on a limestone ridge in southeastern Turkey, near the city of Şanlıurfa, overlooking a wide plain. From a distance, it is an unremarkable mound. The name means potbelly hill. Farmers had been ploughing the top of it for generations and turning up worked stone, and a survey in the 1960s recorded it as a probable medieval cemetery and moved on. It was not until 1994, when the German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt looked at the site again, that anyone understood what was underneath. What is underneath is a series of large circular and oval enclosures, each ringed with those T-shaped pillars, with 2 much larger pillars standing in the center. The stone was quarried from the surrounding bedrock. One unfinished pillar still lies in its quarry, nearly 7 meters long, abandoned before it was freed. The carvings cover snakes, scorpions, vultures, aurochs, spiders, wild asses, and abstract symbols nobody has decoded. The dating is what changes everything. The earliest layers are around 9500 BCE. Stonehenge is roughly 6,000 years younger. The Great Pyramid is about 7,000 years younger. Writing does not exist yet. The wheel does not exist. Pottery does not exist. Metal tools do not exist. And critically, according to the current understanding of the region, neither does agriculture. This was built at the very edge of the transition by people who were still substantially hunter-gatherers in a landscape of wild grasses and gazelle herds. That single fact rearranged a long-standing assumption. The conventional sequence held that farming came first. People settle, produce surplus, develop hierarchy, and only then can they afford monuments. Göbekli Tepe suggests the order may run differently, at least here. The monument may have come first, a gathering place that required hundreds of people to build and to feed, and that pressure, the need to supply large seasonal assemblies, may itself have driven the domestication of the wild grains growing on the surrounding hills. Some of the earliest genetically identified domesticated wheat has been traced to a mountain range about 30 kilometers away. It is a compelling idea, and it remains contested, as it should be. Ongoing excavation has complicated the early picture considerably. Evidence of domestic structures, of water systems, of longer occupation than initially assumed. It may not have been a purely ceremonial site with no residents. Less than 1/10 of the mound has been excavated. Geophysical surveys indicate many more enclosures still buried. And nearby sites, Karahan Tepe among them, with its own extraordinary carved chambers, show this was not one strange building, but a whole cultural landscape. What has not been explained is the burial. At some point, the enclosures were intentionally backfilled with rubble, bone, and debris, packing them entirely. This is why they survived in such condition, and nobody knows why it was done. Retirement of a sacred space, a ritual closing, a change of belief. The pillars were covered, and the hill went quiet for 11 millennia. Standing among them now, the excavation sheltered under a modern canopy, the stone pale and precise, the fox still leaping, the disorientation is temporal rather than visual. These people had no writing to leave us. Everything we will ever know about their intentions must be inferred from the arrangement of rock. They were as intelligent as we are. They had a cosmology, and it involved vultures and scorpions and enormous silent figures standing in a ring, arms folded, facing each other in the dark. Ground that has cracked into ridges and salt-white crusts, folded into ranks of jagged spines, colored in dusty ochres and grays and faint pinks. No plants, no insects, no lichen on the rocks. Under a sky so clear it edges toward violet, a small six-wheeled vehicle picks its way across the surface, testing its footing, sampling soil, sending data to engineers who are pretending, but only just, that this is another planet. This is the Valle de la Luna, the Valley of the Moon, in Chile's Atacama Desert, and it is the closest thing on Earth to somewhere else. The Atacama is the driest non-polar desert in the world. Some weather stations here have gone decades without measurable rainfall, and there are locations in its core where researchers believe no significant rain has fallen for centuries. The reason is geographic bad luck compounded. To the west, the cold Humboldt Current chills the air over the Pacific so that it holds little moisture and produces almost no rain when it reaches land. To the east, the Andes rise as a wall 6,000 meters high, blocking every drop of Amazonian moisture. The desert sits in a double rain shadow, squeezed dry from both directions, on a high plateau where the atmosphere is thin and the ultraviolet radiation is punishing. What that produces is a landscape stripped of the softening effects of life. Elsewhere, weathering is partly biological: roots, bacteria, fungus, decay. Here it is almost purely physical and chemical. Salt crystals grow in the cracks of rocks and split them apart. Ancient lake beds have been uplifted and buckled by tectonic pressure into ridges, then carved by rare catastrophic flows and by wind. Gypsum and halite bloom across the surface in white crusts that crackle underfoot, and in the heat of the afternoon actually make audible popping sounds as they expand. The valley is edged by the Cordillera de la Sal, the Salt Mountain Range, and dominated by a great crescent dune sitting against a wall of eroded rock. The Mars comparison is not a marketing line. NASA, the European Space Agency, and various university teams have used the Atacama as a testing ground for decades. Rover prototypes are driven over its terrain. Life detection instruments are calibrated in its soils which, in the hyper-arid core, are so sterile that early testing sometimes returned no detectable organics at all, which is itself the point. If your instrument can find the sparse life that does survive here, it might find it on Mars. The soil chemistry is also genuinely comparable, rich in perchlorates and nitrates of the sort detected by landers on the Martian surface. And life does survive, barely, in ways that expand the definition. Microbial communities live inside translucent rocks, sheltering below the surface where a little light penetrates and a little moisture condenses. Others live within salt crystals, which pull water directly out of the air. Along the coastal fringe, fog rolls in, the Camanchaca, and delivers the only water some organisms will ever receive. These are the organisms astrobiologists study because they define the outer boundary of what living things can tolerate. Above it all is the sky. The dryness and altitude and the absence of light pollution make northern Chile one of the finest places on Earth for astronomy, and the great observatories are gathered here, watching. At sunset, the valley turns a series of colors that photographs handle badly. The rock going orange, then red, then a violet that seems to come from inside it, and the temperature drops fast enough that you feel it on your face. Then the stars come out with a density that is difficult to accept. You are standing on a rehearsal stage for another world, looking up at the actual thing. A spire of dark rock, 50 meters high, standing alone on a green hillside above the sea. It is too vertical. It leans slightly, tapering, with a heavier mass near the top, and it should have fallen a long time ago. Around it the mist comes and goes in sheets, so that the pinnacle appears and disappears, and in the moments when it is half hidden, it looks unmistakably like a figure standing with its back to you, This is the Old Man of Storr, on the Trottenish Peninsula of the Isle of Skye. The Storr itself is the high point of the ridge behind it, a wall of cliffs, and beneath that wall lies a jumble of pinnacles and blocks and grassy hummocks known as the Sanctuary. The whole arrangement is the product of the largest landslide complex in Britain. The geology here is layered in an unfortunate order. Around 60 million years ago, as the North Atlantic was opening, immense volumes of basalt lava poured out across this region and cooled into hard, heavy rock. But underneath that basalt lie older Jurassic sediments, soft, weak, waterlogged clays and shales. Heavy rock resting on soft rock is an unstable arrangement, and over millions of years, accelerated after the last glaciers withdrew and removed the ice that had been buttressing the slopes, the basalt cap began to fail. Great sections slid downhill, rotating and breaking apart as they went. What survives standing are the more resistant fragments left behind, isolated towers of dolerite, weathered into columns. The Old Man is one of them. The landslide has not finished. The Trottenish Ridge is still moving, slowly, and the pinnacles are all in the process of falling. They simply operate on a timescale that makes them appear permanent. There was once a companion formation nearby, a natural arch known as the Old Man's Finger, which collapsed. The Old Man itself was first climbed in 1955, and the rock was described as so loose and rotten that the ascent has rarely been repeated with enthusiasm. Then there is the folklore, which does not care about dolerite. The most common story tells of a giant who lived on the Trottenish Ridge and was buried here, with the pinnacle being his thumb, or in other tellings, the whole rock being the giant himself, turned to stone. Another version has an old man and his wife who were fleeing something, or looking back at something they were forbidden to see, and were petrified where they stood. There are stories of a brownie, a household spirit, who helped a crofting family and was rewarded, and whose gratitude is somehow bound into the hill. The Gaelic name for the wider formation, Bodach and Storr, carries the sense of an old man in the way that suggests both age and a slight menace. What holds all these stories together is the same instinct. This thing looks like a person. Human vision is tuned to find faces and bodies in ambiguous shapes, a tendency so strong we see figures in clouds and rock and shadow. Put a 50-meter standing figure on a hill above a village, wrap it in fog 200 days a year, and the stories are inevitable. They are not superstition so much as the natural consequence of living beneath something that appears to be watching. The walk up takes under an hour on a well-made path, and in summer the crowds are considerable. But the weather on Skye changes constantly, and the reward for going early or in poor conditions is the version everyone hopes for. The mist arriving off the Sound of Rasay, drawing across the sanctuary, and the Old Man becoming a shape you are no longer entirely sure about. A narrow staircase between two walls, and both walls and the steps themselves, and the door frames and the drain pipes and the plant pots and the low arch overhead are all painted blue. Not one blue, a whole vocabulary of them. Powder blue at the top of the wall fading to a deep indigo at the base. Turquoise on a door, cobalt on a window frame. A woman in a striped hake walks up through it, and for a moment there is no ground and no sky, only blue in every direction, and the eye loses its footing. Chef Chaouen sits in the Rif Mountains of northern Morocco, tucked into a fold between two peaks that give the town its name. Chef Chaouen suggests the horns and the mountains above do resemble them. It was founded in 1471, initially as a small fortress to resist Portuguese incursions along the coast. Over the following decades, it absorbed waves of refugees, Muslims and Jews expelled from Spain during and after the Reconquista, bringing Andalusian architecture, Andalusian craft, and Andalusian memory. That inheritance is visible in the tiled fountains and the whitewashed arches beneath the paint. For centuries, the town was effectively closed to outsiders. Non-Muslims were forbidden entry, and the handful of Europeans who managed to reach it before the 20th century did so in disguise and at considerable risk. It stayed sealed until the Spanish took the region in 1920. The blue is the question everyone asks, and the answer is contested in a way that has become part of the appeal. The The most repeated explanation credits the Jewish population, who arrived in significant numbers in the 1930s fleeing Europe, and who painted buildings blue in accordance with a tradition connecting the color to the divine. To Techelet, the blue dye of ritual fringes, and to the sky and to heaven, a color intended to keep the mind lifted toward God. It is a lovely account, and it has become the official one, repeated on every plaque and in every guidebook. Other explanations are more prosaic and probably at least partly true. Blue-tinted lime wash was believed to repel mosquitoes. Blue keeps interiors cooler in summer heat. Blue was cheap, made with copper sulfate and readily available. And some residents will tell you, quite plainly, that the whole town was mostly white and green until tourism arrived, and that the wholesale bluing of the Medina is a phenomenon of recent decades, a decision that succeeded so thoroughly it rewrote the town's history. Both things can be true. There was a tradition, and then there was an amplification of that tradition, and now there is a place that genuinely does not resemble anywhere else. What is not in dispute is the effect. Walking the Medina, the blue does something to perception. It flattens depth. Shadows, which would normally be gray or brown, come out violet. Skin tones and clothing colors leap forward. Photographers describe it as working inside an aquarium. And because the paint is refreshed constantly, households repaint their own stretch of wall, often annually before the summer. The surfaces have a soft, chalky texture that catches light rather than reflecting it. The town rises steeply. Above it, the Rif Mountains and a small white mosque on the hillside that provides the classic view down over a sea of blue rooftops. The Ras El Mar spring emerges at the top of the Medina, where women still wash clothes in the running water. Cats sleep in the doorways in absurd numbers. Chef Chawa is not a natural wonder. It is the one entry here that is entirely made by hand, and its impossibility is a human one. The strangeness of a whole community agreeing, over generations, to live inside a single color. A row of enormous heads buried to the shoulders in a grassy slope, facing out over empty grassland toward an empty ocean. Their features are severe and consistent. Heavy brow ridges, long straight noses, thin pressed lips, elongated ears, chins jutting forward. They are between 4 and 10 meters tall, and they weigh, on average, around 12.5 tons. There are nearly 1,000 of them on an island of 163 square kilometers, and the nearest inhabited land is more than 2,000 kilometers away. This is Rapa Nui, and the Moai are the reason it is famous, and the reason it is misunderstood. First, they are not heads. The figures buried on the slopes of Rano Raraku, the quarry, appear as heads because sediment washed down over centuries and filled in around them. Excavation shows full torsos beneath, with arms and hands carved in relief, and on some, elaborate designs across the back. Second, they do not face the sea. Almost all of them face inland, standing on stone platforms called ahu, with their backs to the water, looking over the villages of the people who raised them. They are ancestors. Each Moai is understood to represent a deified ancestor whose mana, whose spiritual power and authority protected the community in whose site it stood. Around 95% were carved from volcanic tuff at Rano Raraku, a single crater over a period from roughly 1250 to 1500 CE. Nearly 400 remain in the quarry at various stages, from rough outlines still attached to the bedrock to finished figures standing upright awaiting transport. The largest ever attempted, still lying in the rock, is around 21 meters and would have weighed close to 200 tons. The question that has consumed outsiders for 300 years is how they were moved, up to 18 kilometers, over rough volcanic terrain, without draft animals, without the wheel, without metal. The old assumption was that they were dragged horizontally on wooden sledges and rollers, which fed a familiar and grim story, that the islanders felled every tree to move their statues, collapsed their own ecosystem, and destroyed themselves. That narrative has not held up well. Rapa Nui oral tradition has always insisted on something else. The statues walked, islanders described them moving upright, and the phrasing survives in chants. For a long time this was treated as poetry. Then archaeologists took it literally, and experiments demonstrated that a Moai replica, with its forward-leaning posture and D-shaped rounded base, can be rocked upright by 3 teams with ropes. pulling side to side while a third team stabilizes and made to shuffle forward in a swaying gait that looks precisely like walking. Statues abandoned along the ancient roads are shaped consistently with this method, and those that fell face down going uphill and face up going downhill fit the pattern too. The collapse story has also been revised. Deforestation was real, but the Polynesian rat, arriving with the first settlers and eating palm seeds, appears to have been a major driver. And the catastrophic population crash, long attributed to internal ecological suicide, corresponds far more closely to European contact from 1722 onward, disease, and then Peruvian slave raids in the 1860s that removed a substantial portion of the population, including the last people who could read Rongorongo, the island's undeciphered script. The Moai were toppled over time in internal conflict. The ones standing today were re-erected in the modern era. What remains is the scale of the ambition, a few thousand people on a speck of volcanic rock in the middle of the largest ocean on Earth, carving 1,000 giants and walking them across their island to stand watch. It is not a story of failure. It is one of the most extraordinary feats of will in the human record. Put your hand against the wall of the Temple of the Sun and try to find the joint. The stones are irregular, no two the same size, some with 5 sides, some with 12, and yet they meet along seams so tight that a sheet of paper will not pass between them. There is no mortar. Nothing holds these blocks together except their own weight and the precision of their surfaces. They have been standing like this at 2,400 meters through 5 centuries of earthquakes, and they have not moved. Machu Picchu occupies a narrow ridge between 2 peaks in the eastern Andes, above a sharp bend in the Urubamba River, with cloud forest falling away on all sides. It was built in the mid-15th century, most likely under the Emperor Pachacuti, and is generally understood as a royal estate, a retreat for the ruler and his household, staffed by perhaps several hundred people, with a strong religious function layered over it. It was never a lost city in the sense the phrase implies. Local farmers knew exactly where it was when Hiram Bingham arrived in 1911. 3 families were living on the terraces. What Bingham did was bring it to international attention. The Spanish, crucially, never found it, which is why it survived intact when so much else did not. The construction is where the disbelief starts. Inca masons worked without iron tools, without the wheel, and without draft animals capable of hauling heavy loads. The finest walls are ashlar work, blocks dressed with harder hammerstones, ground and fitted through repeated trial, lowered, checked, lifted, adjusted, lowered again, over and over until the contact was total. The faces are slightly convex, the edges drafted, and many blocks are not simple boxes, but locked into their neighbors in 3 dimensions. The walls lean inward by a few degrees. Doorways and windows are trapezoidal, narrower at the top. Both features distribute seismic load. In an earthquake, the mortarless blocks are said to shift slightly, dance and settle back into position, a flexibility that rigid mortared walls do not have. What is less visible is the engineering underneath. Studies suggest that around 60% of the construction effort at Machu Picchu is invisible. Deep foundations, layered drainage of gravel and crushed stone beneath the terraces, and more than 100 drainage channels routing water off a site that receives around 2,000 millimeters of rain a year on steep, unstable ground. It is not standing by luck. It was designed to shed water, and it has been shedding water for 500 years. Then there is the sky. The Intihuatana, a carved stone outcrop at the highest point, is aligned such that at the equinoxes, the sun stands almost directly above it and casts virtually no shadow. Its name is usually translated as the hitching post of the sun. The Temple of the Sun has a window positioned so that on the June solstice, sunrise light falls precisely on a ceremonial stone within. Another structure, the Temple of the 3 Windows, frames specific horizons. The site's orientation relates to surrounding sacred peaks, and the Inca also read the sky by the dark spaces within the Milky Way rather than the bright stars, identifying animal shapes in the dust clouds. The ridge was chosen, it seems, because of what could be seen from it. Machu Picchu was occupied for perhaps 80 to 100 years, and then abandoned, probably around the time of the Spanish conquest, as the empire that sustained it disintegrated. The forest closed over it, and it sat there, drained and level and perfectly fitted, waiting for the vegetation to be cut back and for the rest of the world to arrive and press its fingers into a seam it cannot find. A bowl of sandstone that appears to be liquid. Bands of red, orange, cream, and pale yellow run across the rock in continuous curves, and they do not behave like layers in stone. They behave like currents, sweeping up the walls, folding over each other, converging at the bottom of the basin into a smooth channel that draws the eye and the feet forward. The surface underfoot is hard and warm. Everything about it says motion. Nothing has moved here in a very long time. This is the Wave, in the Coyote Butte's north area of the Paria Canyon Vermilion Cliffs Wilderness, on the Arizona-Utah border. It is small, the main formation is only a few dozen meters across, and reaching it requires a 5-kilometer walk across open desert with no marked trail, navigating by landmarks. Access is limited by lottery to a very small number of people per day, which means that on most days there are more photographs of this place taken worldwide than people standing in it. The rock is Navajo sandstone, and it began as a desert. In the early Jurassic, roughly 190 million years ago, this region was covered by an earg, a vast field of dunes comparable in scale to the modern Sahara, stretching across what is now the American Southwest. Wind piled sand into enormous dunes, and as the wind shifted, so did the direction in which each dune advanced. Sand deposited on the slip face of a moving dune settles at a steep angle, and when the wind changes and a new dune buries the old, those steep layers are preserved and then truncated by the next set, arriving at a different angle. This is crossbedding, and it is the entire reason the wave looks the way it does. What you are seeing is the internal architecture of dead dunes, the frozen record of wind direction over millions of years, exposed in cross-section. The stripes are not decorative, they are wind, made visible. The colors come later. Groundwater moving through the buried sandstone carried dissolved iron, which precipitated out along boundaries in the rock, staining it in bands of red and orange and yellow, depending on the mineral and the conditions. Some layers were bleached pale by fluids that stripped the iron out again. The result is a body of stone whose color follows its structure. Then the region uplifted, the overlying rock eroded away, and wind and the rare desert rain went to work on the exposed sandstone. Water running through the troughs cut the smooth channel. Wind funneled through the same gap, kept polishing after the water stopped. The bowl was carved along the softest lines, which happened to be the bedding planes, which is why the erosion follows the color instead of cutting across it. The scale is deceptive in photographs. People assume it is vast, it is intimate, and you can cross it in a minute. What photographs also cannot convey is the fragility. The rock is soft, and in places there are delicate ridges and thin fins that a careless step would destroy, which is precisely why the permits exist. The desert around it is silent and exposed and dangerous in summer, when heat has killed hikers who could not find their way back. It is a place that asks for a small amount of luck and a certain amount of respect. Stand in the trough and look up at the walls sweeping past you, and the illusion is complete. You are inside a wave that has been breaking for 190 million years, and it is not going to reach the shore in your lifetime. Steam rising off water the color of skimmed milk with blue stirred into it, opaque and glowing, held inside a field of black lava. The lava is jagged and sharp-edged, still recognizably molten in shape, and it is covered in soft gray-green moss. There is snow on the ground. The air is close to freezing. The water is 38 degrees Celsius, and people are standing in it up to their shoulders with white clay smeared across their faces, entirely relaxed, in what is unmistakably an industrial byproduct. That last part is the detail most visitors don't know. The Blue Lagoon on the Reykjanes Peninsula in southwest Iceland is not a natural hot spring. It exists because of a power plant. Iceland sits astride the mid-Atlantic ridge, where the North American and Eurasian plates are pulling apart, and the country is essentially a volcanic seam that happens to be above sea level. That gives it an enormous geothermal resource, and in 1976, the Svartsengi geothermal plant began drilling into the reservoir beneath the lava field, drawing up a mixture of seawater and fresh water superheated to well over 200 degrees. The plant uses that heat to generate electricity and to warm the towns nearby, and then it has to dispose of the water. It was pumped out onto the lava field on the assumption it would drain away through the porous rock. It did not. The water was saturated with dissolved silica, and as it cooled, the silica precipitated out and sealed the lava's pores, forming a soft white sediment that made the ground watertight. A lagoon accumulated where nobody planned one. In 1981, a man with psoriasis bathed in it and reported that his skin improved dramatically. Word spread. People began arriving with towels to sit in the runoff from a power station. By 1987, there were changing facilities, and today it is Iceland's most visited attraction. The color has an ordinary cause. Suspended silica particles scatter sunlight, and they scatter short wavelengths most efficiently. The same physics that makes the sky blue. The water absorbs red light, so what comes back to the eye is blue, and the density of particles makes it milky rather than clear. The white mud on the bottom is silica, harvested and used in the skincare products the site is famous for. Algae grow in it too, giving parts of the lagoon a green tint in summer. The water is renewed roughly every 40 hours, and because of its salinity and chemistry, requires no chlorine. The surrounding landscape is the other half of the effect. Reykjanes is a young volcanic field, and stretches of it are covered in lava, rough, broken, hostile to walking, colonized by a thick grey-green woolly fringe moss that takes decades to grow and is destroyed by a single footstep. In winter, the contrast is total: black rock, white snow, grey moss, and that impossible blue. The peninsula reminded everyone how young it is, beginning in 2021, when a volcanic system that had been dormant for around 800 years reawakened and produced a series of eruptions, some close enough to force closures and the construction of defensive barriers. There is something honest about the place. It looks like the most photographed natural wonder in Iceland, and it is really an accident. The residue of a power plant, sealed by chemistry, warmed by the same rift that keeps threatening to close it. A surreal thing made by people who are only trying to get rid of some water. From one specific vantage point, a lake appears to sit in the air. Its far edge is a cliff, and beyond and below that cliff is the open North Atlantic, dark and moving. But from this angle, the lake's surface and the ocean's surface look like they belong to different elevations by an impossible margin. The lake floating perhaps 100 meters or more above the sea, held up by nothing, its water apparently on the verge of pouring over the edge in a single sheet. It does not pour, it has never poured. Nothing is wrong with the physics. Something is wrong with your eyes. This is Survagsvatn, also called Leitisvatn, on the island of Vagar in the Faroe Islands, a small archipelago in the North Atlantic between Iceland, Norway, and Scotland. It is the largest lake in the country, about 6 kilometers long and covering roughly 3.5 square kilometers. At its southwestern end, it comes within a short distance of the sea cliffs at Trellanipan and drains over them through a waterfall called Busdalafossur, which drops around 30 meters directly into the ocean. That number is the key: 30 meters. The lake surface sits about 30 to 40 meters above sea level. Nothing extraordinary. The illusion is created by perspective and by the shape of the land. The photograph everyone knows is taken from the slope above Trellanipan, looking back along the lake with the cliff edge in the foreground. From that position, the camera is high, the far cliff top is at eye level or above, and the lake stretches away into the distance. Because the eye judges height by comparison, and there is no reliable reference object anywhere in the frame, no trees, no buildings, no boats, the brain has nothing to correct itself with. It reads the near cliff as the lake's containing wall and estimates its height from the sea, and it estimates it enormously wrong. What it is actually seeing is a lake at modest elevation, photographed from a much higher point along its length. The effect is a genuine optical trick, not a deception in the photograph. Stand there yourself and you will see it. And it is heightened by the Faroes landscape, which is uniquely suited to producing it. These islands are made of stacked basalt lava flows, laid down around 55 million years ago as the North Atlantic opened, then carved by glaciers into steep-sided valleys and sheer sea cliffs. The result is a place with almost no gradual slopes and virtually no trees. The wind and grazing sheep see to that. Everything is grass, rock, and vertical drop. The weather changes hourly. Cloud sits on the tops, moves off, returns. Rain arrives sideways. There are around 18 islands, 17 of them inhabited, connected by ferries and undersea tunnels, with a population of around 54,000 people and considerably more sheep. The walk out to the viewpoint takes under an hour along the lakeshore, across boggy ground, and there is a small fee to cross the farmland. At the end, there is a headland called the Slave Cliff, named for a bleak tradition that slaves who could no longer work were thrown from it. Nearby, Trilkonufingur, the witch's finger, rises straight out of the sea. The pharaohs are full of names like that. What makes Survagsvatten worth including is not that it is fake. It isn't. It is that it demonstrates how narrow the gap is between the world and our reading of it. The lake is exactly where it should be, obeying every law. The impossibility is entirely inside the observer, and knowing that does absolutely nothing to make it stop. A grey sphere, 2 meters across, sitting on wet sand at low tide as the water pulls back around it. It is not roughly round. It is round in a way that reads as manufactured, smooth, symmetrical, with a network of raised ridges across its surface, dividing it into plates, like something that has been cast and then cracked. There are others along the beach, dozens of them, some whole, some split open to reveal a hollow interior lined with yellow crystal. They look placed. They look like they were left. These are the Moeraki boulders on Koekohe Beach, on the Otago coast of New Zealand's South Island. They are concretions, and they are around 60 million years old. Their formation begins on the seafloor, in the Paleocene, in soft mud accumulating slowly. Somewhere in that mud, a nucleus forms, a shell fragment, a piece of bone, a bit of organic material. As the organic matter decays, it changes the local chemistry of the water in the sediment, and calcium carbonate begins to precipitate out around the nucleus, cementing the surrounding mud grains together. Crucially, the cement grows outward evenly in all directions, because the mud is uniform and the chemistry doesn't favor any particular direction. The result is a sphere. It grows slowly. Estimates for the largest boulders suggest 4 to 5 million years of accumulation. Meanwhile, mud continues to bury the whole assembly and over time compresses into mudstone. The concretion, already hardened, resists that compression, which is why it stays spherical rather than being flattened. Then the seafloor becomes land, the coastline erodes, and the soft mudstone cliffs behind the beach are worn back by the sea, releasing the boulders one by one onto the shore. New ones still emerge. You can see them protruding from the cliff face, half exposed, waiting. The ridges are the last detail and the strangest one. As the concretions dried and shrank slightly, they cracked internally, and mineral-rich water later filled those cracks with calcite and quartz. That vein material is harder than the surrounding rock, so when the outer surface weathers away, the veins stand proud, creating the septarian pattern that makes the boulders look constructed. Split ones show the interior clearly, a honeycomb of yellow-brown calcite lining hollow chambers. Maori tradition offers a different account, and it is the older one on this land. The boulders are described as remnants from the wreck of the Arai Te Uru, one of the great voyaging canoes, which was lost off this coast. The round stones are the eel baskets, the food baskets, and the gourds that washed ashore from it, and a nearby rocky reef is the hull, and a prominent rock is the body of the canoe's navigator. Similar concretions appear elsewhere along the same coast and elsewhere in the world. There are comparable formations in Utah, in Kansas, in the Czech Republic, but nowhere are they so numerous, so large, or so photogenic in their setting. There were considerably more here once. 19th century visitors removed many as curiosities, and the site is now protected. What stays with you is the arrangement. At dawn, with the tide out and the sky reflecting in the wet sand, the boulders sit in the shallow water, like something set down deliberately and abandoned. The temptation to read intention into them is overwhelming, and it is entirely misplaced. There was no intention, just mud, chemistry, and 60 million years of extremely patient work. A field of yellow. Not sand yellow, a saturated chemical warning label yellow crusted into shapes that look like coral or fungus. with pools of green liquid held in basins between them and rings of orange and white spreading outward. Steam rises from vents. The whole surface is soft and hollow underneath, and if you step in the wrong place, your boot goes through into acid. The air smells of sulfur and burns the inside of the nose. The temperature is 45 degrees Celsius, and it is not the hottest part of the day. This is Dalol in the Danakil Depression of northern Ethiopia's Afar region, and it is a serious contender for the least Earth-like place on Earth. The Danakil sits in the Afar Triangle where three tectonic plates, Nubian, Somali, and Arabian, are pulling away from each other at a triple junction. The crust here is being stretched and thinned and torn, and the land has dropped. Much of the depression lies more than 100 meters below sea level, in places reaching around 125 meters down. Geologists describe this as an ocean in the process of being born. Over the coming millions of years, the rift will likely deepen until the Red Sea breaks through and floods it. In the meantime, it is the hottest inhabited place on the planet by average annual temperature, around 34 to 35 degrees Celsius year-round, with summer days regularly exceeding 50. Rainfall is under 200 millimeters a year, and in some parts nearly nothing. The colors at Dalol come from a collision of geology. There are thick salt deposits left behind when the Red Sea repeatedly flooded and evaporated this basin. Beneath them is volcanic heat. Water percolating down is superheated, dissolves iron, sulfur, potash, and other minerals from the salt and rock, and comes back up as hypersaline brine, often more acidic than battery acid. pH values close to 0 and sometimes below have been measured. As it reaches the surface and reacts with oxygen and cools, the dissolved minerals precipitate in sequence: sulfur yellow, iron oxide orange and red, salt white, copper salts green and blue. The formations build up into terraces and chimneys and pools that change appearance over months because the springs shift and the crust collapses and rebuilds. Nearby, Lake Asela is a vast salt flat where Afar workers still cut slabs of salt by hand with wooden poles and load them onto camels, in caravans that have been running this route for centuries. Not far away is Erta Ale, a shield volcano holding one of the world's very few long-lived lava lakes, molten rock, exposed at the surface, churning and crusting and cracking open in orange seams continuously for over a century. Standing on its rim at night is one of the few places where you can watch the interior of the planet without an intermediary. And there is life. Some of the acidic hot pools at Dalol have been the subject of intense study because if anything can survive there, it redraws the boundary of habitability, relevant directly to the search for life on Mars, which has similar mineral signatures. Findings have been contested. One team reported tiny nanobacteria in the brines. Another argued that the combination of extreme acidity, extreme salinity, and magnesium-rich chemistry makes some of those specific pools genuinely sterile. One of the few places on Earth where liquid water exists and life does not. That may be the most unsettling detail of all. This is not an empty landscape. The Afar people live in and around it, herding, mining salt, moving through heat that most bodies cannot tolerate. To visit requires guides, armed escorts, and a great deal of water. It is beautiful in a way that is difficult to admit to, because everything that makes it beautiful is also what would kill you. The acid, the heat, the salt, the gas. It is the closest the planet comes to showing what it is actually made of underneath. And the answer is not comforting. 14 places. Some of them can be fully explained, and the explanations are, in their way, more remarkable than the mystery was. The stones move because of a thin sheet of ice and a gentle wind, which is a stranger answer than magnets. The lake hovers because of geometry and the absence of a tree. The boulders are round because chemistry has no preferred direction and had 60 million years to demonstrate it. And some of them cannot be fully explained, and probably never will be. Nobody knows why Göbekli Tepe was buried. Nobody has read Rongorongo. We understand how a Moai could be walked, but not exactly how each one was, or what the last carvers were thinking as they stopped mid-figure in the quarry and left. There is a certain honesty in admitting that. Most of the past is gone, and the fragments we have are not enough to reconstruct intention. What links these places is not their strangeness. It is what they do to the person standing in front of them. They interrupt something. There is a habit of mind, easy to fall into, in which the world is understood as basically finished, surveyed, photographed, catalogued, and available on demand. Under that assumption, nothing can genuinely surprise you because everything has already been seen by someone else and reduced to an image. These places break the habit briefly, not because they are undiscovered, but because standing in them produces a physical response that images cannot transmit. The smell of sulfur, the cold of Atlantic wind, the temperature of sandstone under a palm, the particular quality of silence on a dry lakebed. Every one of these locations is the product of conditions that did not have to occur. Socotra required a continental fragment to break away and then be left alone for 20 million years. The Atacama required an ocean current and a mountain range to be positioned exactly where they are. The Danakil requires 3 tectonic plates to be pulling apart at a single point. Machu Picchu required a specific empire in a specific century to choose a specific ridge, change any variable, and none of it exists. This is what it means to call Earth a place of statistical impossibilities. Not that it is magical, but that it is the outcome of an unrepeatable sequence, and the sequence produced things that look invented because nothing designed them. There was no intention anywhere in the geology. The wave was not carved, the stones were not placed, the lake was not lifted. Every one of these arrived through processes that were indifferent to how they would look. And yet the results are so consistently, so improbably beautiful, that our first reaction is to assume a maker, a designer, a special effects artist, someone with a plan. It is worth ending on that quietly. The world does not need us to find it impressive. These places existed for millions of years before there was anyone to photograph them, and the sailing stones will keep sailing on those rare cold mornings when nobody is watching, and the mist will keep closing over the old man of store, and the lava lake will keep turning over in the dark. Our looking is not part of the mechanism. It is only a small, late addition. A species that arrived recently, developed the ability to be astonished, and then spent a great deal of its time doubting the evidence of its own eyes. Go and stand in one of them if you can. Not for the photograph. The photograph will not be believed anyway.